Canadian tennis, it's back. I'm calling it now. We are back, specifically on the men's side. And let's start in Dubai. Felix Auger-Aliassime reaching his third ATP final of the season. Look, he didn't win this one. Fell to Stefanos Tsitsipas in the final 6-3, 6-3. But Felix now 16 wins on the season, which leads the tour. 3 finals, 2 titles. He's currently third in the live ATP race, meaning has the third most ranking points of any player this season. And you think back to his peak being probably the fall of 2022 when he reached a career high number 6. The way he's playing right now, reminiscent of that period of time. And he looks like one of those top guys and a top 10 player yet again.
Absolutely. And his recent run has got me going into full-on stat mode, which, I don't do as often as I used to. I mean, when I was a kid, I went deep on stats all the time. I had binders that I would keep of tournaments and stuff like that before the internet was, a thing, just to date myself a little bit. But last year, his 16th win came at the Madrid Masters in, I believe, like late April or May or wherever that one falls. In 2023, he didn't get his 16th win until Tokyo in October, which tells you what a difficult season that was for him. And even in 2022, which was his, big year where he made the top 10, peaked at number 6 in the rankings, and amassed 60 wins by the end of the calendar season, he didn't get his 16th win until late April. So he is having, I would say, the best start of any season, statistically anyways, that he's had in his career. And what I also like is just what he's saying after the matches about it's increasing his self-belief. It's making him feel better as he approaches the big events. And he made it pretty open in his, one of his press conferences earlier in the tournament that winning more at the ATP level is going to be helpful for him to replicate those results at the majors, which is obviously something where he knows he hasn't lived up to his hype the last couple of years.
Yeah, look, I think it's confidence building. And I was also, I just wrote like an article about the Canadian men performing well and was sort of looking back at those struggles and those difficulty in results and reminiscing on, 2023 when he was in Toronto in the midst of a brutal slump and lost that first round match to Max Purcell. And at that time, you had to think confidence was at an all-time low for Felix. And he slipped outside of the top 30 that season before kind of salvaging it at the end of the year. And just remembering some of his huge results early in his career in 2019, reaching a Rio Open final when he was just 18 years of age. He's been a supreme talent on a lot of people's radar for a long time. I think there was a lot of pressure. There were a lot of expectations. I think now he's managing his career maybe the best he has. If we can see, as you mentioned, those Grand Slam results, that's really the only thing missing for me. Indian Wells and Miami, Indian Wells now getting underway with qualifying, wrapping up. He's been to the semifinals of Indian Wells when he was a teenager and lost a match there to John Isner where he was serving for both of those sets. I think he's a much better player now than he was back then.
I mean, it's funny that him and Denis Shapovalov are both kind of mirroring each other in some ways, in the fact that they both had big results when they were young. And in some ways, it's easier to come out when you're that age. You don't know any different. I mean, remember Chapo, he was staying on Felix's couch in Montreal the summer of 2017 when he had that great run there at the National Bank Open. So, the exuberance of youth and not knowing any better. And then as you get a little bit older into your 20s and you've been doing the pro tennis player thing for a few years, the expectations and the pressure, and it starts to mount and you hear people asking you the same questions in press. Hey, what's the difference? How come you're not having these successes at the majors? How come you haven't had a deep run in a couple of years now? And of course that's going to weigh on your mind. So he credits his coaching staff all the way through to his mental trainer as well to help him with what he's been doing so far this year. And the belief is there. I think our hopes are higher, but we do want to see it at these 1,000 level tournaments. He says he's feeling great physically. Like they asked him in post-match after losing to Tsitsipas, was fatigue a bit of an issue because he had some 3-set matches there? He said, no, I wish I was still on the court right now fighting into a third set because I've got the gas in the tank. So to me, that bodes well that he's arriving in Indian Wells and ready to rock and keep things going here.
And look, to touch on Stefanos Tsitsipas, it's unbelievable how 1 week can change the narrative completely. Because
We
the
just talked
previous
about him last week, didn't we?
we talked about him last week, losing to a guy who'd torn a hamstring in a third set tiebreak, where you're thinking this is like the low point here for Tsitsipas, and he hadn't won a title since the spring of 2023. Zero titles last year, early exits at Wimbledon, at the U.S. Open. He dropped outside the top 10. I think a lot of people were writing him off. He came into Dubai with a blacked out racket. People didn't know what he was playing with. And the one-hander was back and dialed in, and he was free-flowing, accelerating through the ball, looking like the Tsitsipas of old, who was a guy, in semifinals and finals of Grand Slams. So a huge title for him. Surprisingly, his first ever ATP 500, which is unusual because he's won Masters 1000s before. And now he's back inside the top 10. We know how big a racket change was for Madison Keys at the front end of the year on the women's side. Maybe this, breeds completely new results for Stefanos moving forward for 2025.
Maybe I got to start looking for some online deals for this spring when I start hitting the tennis court again myself. But yeah, Felix mentioned that he's never seen Tsitsipas return that well. And that's pretty staggering because the two of them have played each other so many times going back to the
11 times
days.
or something. Yeah. Oh, and that doesn't even count juniors.
That's right. Like they've got quite the rivalry going back, the friendly rivalry. But yeah, Felix said that in particular, his backhand return, he's never seen it that strong, taking it that early and hitting it that hard. So yeah, great to see him back. It is kind of funny that you and I were just discussing his slump and sort of fall off the top of the rankings recently. But this puts him back up there. Big confidence boost. I mean, I never thought that this was going to be a turning point for him where we wouldn't see him back in the top 10 or top areas of the sport. He's been there. He's been so consistent the last 3 or 4 seasons. And I don't have his age off the top of my head, but what is he, like 28, 29 years old now?
Maybe 20, yeah, maybe 28 is a good guess. I should take a look.
Still got so many good years ahead of him.
Yep.
So yeah, great to see. One of the fun, we talk about Andrea Prisicario being sort of this enigmatic, mysterious kind of deep layered personality, and he certainly fits that mold on the men's side.
Yeah, he sure does. We had the other ATP 500 in Acapulco, where Denis Shapovalov, who had been coming off a big title in Dallas, biggest of his career, reached the semifinals of this event, extended his match-winning streak to 8 before losing to Alejandro Davidovich Fokina. But to me, another great event from Denis Shapovalov. Thomas Mahach picked up his first career title there. Unusual event, I'll just mention, like 5 of the top guys went down with food poisoning, illness. Holger Rune, Tommy Paul, Casper Ruud, maybe Zverev too got a bit sick. It was unusual. There was a lot of carnage in the draw with guys getting sick. Denis Shapovalov continues to play great tennis though, and he's now inside the top 30. And I looked this same point last year, and obviously he was on the sidelines not playing this point last year with that knee injury. He was 131 in the world in March of 2024. Now he's number 28.
He's come a long way, and that slide to 130, that felt like it had been going on for some time. I mean, there was the injury, but even before the injury, he hadn't seemed to have been playing consistent tennis. It's been a while since we've seen this from him. And as I'm looking at my Indian Wells bracket here that I've printed off, to see a number 27 next to his name, I mean, it's great to see the number 17 next to Felix. But this to me is more surprising and less expected because he's had to come a lot further up in the rankings. But it's fantastic. It means those draws are going to be a little bit easier for him in the early goings. Big confidence boost for him. I mean, he might get Carlos Alcaraz. I know we're not quite at our men's preview here, but Alcaraz looming in potentially in round 3. But regardless, hopefully as you stay seated, you're going to get some draws where you have some favorable early round matchups.
Yeah, ideally. And the fact that they are going to be seated in both these players, especially I think for Denis to be seated at Grand Slam events, which is something we haven't seen in a while, which is crazy to think. And I was doing some reflection on his career, the fact that he was playing for the spot of the finals of Wimbledon, center court against Novak Djokovic, just like 3.5 years ago. It tells me he has that level. We're seeing it again. Credit, I think, to his hiring. He's someone who's had instabilities with his coaching team in the past, and he added Yanko Tipsarevic at the front end of this season, and everything seems to be going great. He seems so hungry and motivated, whereas you mentioned maybe a couple of years before he seemed a little bit lost in the clouds at times, even before that injury.
And maybe at the age of 25 now, he's going through that maturing process and realizing, like, hey, if I don't get my you-know-what together here, I'm going to be wasting such an enormous amount of talent. And we've seen that from other players before, right? Like, I'm not comparing him to an Andre Agassi, but, like, Agassi's a guy who had so much talent. Everyone knew he could have been a big deal even sooner. But, you know, the focus wasn't necessarily there. And for Shapo, how many times have we seen him on court imploding, losing focus based on someone in the crowd or, you know, his opponent or himself, or whatever the case may be. And if you could just keep that together and block it out and get back to playing tennis and find a way to, you know, win when you're not at your best, I mean, that's what separates the greats from everybody else.
Thank you guys so much for watching us at Matchpoint Canada. If you like our work, follow along, hit the subscribe button below.